Alright, imagine this. It's 1818. Two powerful kingdoms. One land soaked in ambition, pride, and war drums echoing through thick forest. On one side, you've got Benin, a war-hardened empire that's been flexing military muscle for centuries. On the other, Akure, small but mighty, with warriors that don't back down from a fight. Now tossed in betrayal, power struggles, and one of the boldest invasions in pre-colonial West Africa. Yeah. This one's going to be wild. But before swords clashed and cities burned, let's rewind a bit. Because this beef, it didn't start overnight. Benin, by the early 1800s, wasn't just chilling. They were already a force, known far and wide for their massive bronze art, fierce obas, and a military so organized it could make European armies sweat. Meanwhile, Akure was no pushover either. This Yoruba city-state was rising fast, carving its own lane in the political chaos of the region. And that, right there, was the problem. Two kings. Two empires. One region. Somebody was going to make a move. See, the Benin Empire had long seen itself as the top dog in the region. They believed most kingdoms around them owed loyalty, or at least tribute. But Akure, they weren't feeling that energy. They had their own kingship system, their own gods, their own sense of destiny. And when an Oba from Benin sent messengers demanding tribute and respect, the Deji of Akure basically said, "No. We good." And just like that, a line was crossed. What followed was a slow boil, rumors of raids, missing traders, border skirmishes, and a lot of diplomatic shade being thrown in every direction. It was tense. But the final spark, that came when a Benin ambassador was allegedly disrespected in Akure. Word got back to Oba Ozumwend, the new and determined ruler of Benin. And let's just say, he wasn't the type to turn the other cheek. In his eyes, Akure needed to be reminded who held the crown in the region. This wasn't just about one insult. It was about sending a message. A message in steel and fire. So, yeah. This wasn't just a war for territory. It was a war for legacy. And as Benin's warriors sharpened their swords and Akure scouts watched the horizon, both sides knew they weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for history. And history, it was about to get messy. When Oba Ozumwen gave the order, it was like thunder rolling across the kingdom. He wasn't just sending troops, he was unleashing the pride of an empire. Benin's military was a well-oiled machine. We're talking elite regiments, fierce sword fighters, archers, and tactical geniuses. These weren't just warriors, these were legends in the making. And at the head of this campaign, General Erebo. A name whispered with both fear and respect. But this wasn't going to be a walk in the park. Akure, once they caught wind of what was coming, didn't cower. The Deji rallied his warriors, fortified his walls, and prepared the city for siege. Everyone knew, if Benin was marching, they weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to conquer. Now, Akure had its own edge. Its warriors knew the land, dense forests, narrow trails, hidden vantage points. Guerrilla tactics were their bread and butter. They didn't need to win every fight, they just needed to slow Benin down long enough to bleed them out. As Benin's army moved southward, village after village watched in silence or fled into the bush. Some towns submitted early, hoping to avoid the wrath. Others, not so lucky. Fires lit up the sky as resistance was met with swift and brutal force. Messages from the front were grim, Benin is coming. And they are not slowing down. Meanwhile, Akure doubled down. War drums echoed day and night. Blacksmiths worked non-stop forging weapons. Even hunters and farmers grabbed spears and joined defense units. This wasn't just a king's war anymore. It was everyone's war. And with every passing day, the inevitable drew closer. The two forces were heading for a showdown. Not in secret. Not by ambush. But face to face, in broad daylight, with everything on the line. The question hanging in the air wasn't if a battle would happen. It was when. And more importantly, who'd still be standing when the dust cleared. It finally happened just outside the gates of Akure. No sneak attacks. No half measures. Just two ancient powerhouses staring each other down under the scorching African sun. On one side, Benin's disciplined ranks, marching in perfect formation, armored up and ready to wreck. On the other, Akure's fearless warriors, loud, proud, and ready to die defending their land. The opening clash was pure chaos. Drums pounded like thunder, spears flew, and the first wave hit like a crashing storm. Benin's frontline advanced hard, using tight formations and shield tactics that overwhelmed many defenders. Their discipline was unmatched. They didn't just fight, they moved like one living, breathing creature. Every sword swing, every command, it all flowed like water. But Akure? Man, Akure wasn't backing down. They knew every inch of the terrain. They used the trees, the rocks, the terrain to their advantage. Ambush squads struck from hidden trails, archers fired from above, and the defenders inside the city launched counterattacks that shocked even the most seasoned Benin fighters. Hours turned to days. Blood soaked the soil. The wounded screamed while both sides pushed themselves beyond the limit. And in the middle of this madness, General Erebo, leading from the front, cutting through lines like a storm with a sword. The man was relentless. But the Deji of Akure, he didn't flinch. From behind the city walls, he rallied his people like a true lion of the Yoruba. There was no clear winner. Not yet. Every inch gained came at a heavy price. Every retreat was met with vengeance. And while Benin's army slowly tightened the noose, Akure refused to go down. It wasn't just about soldiers anymore. It was about legacy. About honor. About proving that you could stare an empire in the face and not blink. And just when it seemed like Benin had the upper hand, Akure unleashed something unexpected. A brutal, final gambit that would shake the battlefield and change the course of the war. With Benin at their doorstep, Akure played their final card. A coordinated night assault. Not just with warriors, but with hunters, priests, even women armed with poison-tipped arrows. Under moonlight, they slipped through the shadows like ghosts. It was chaos. Benin's camps were hit hard and fast. Fires erupted, animals stampeded, and warriors were roused from sleep with blades at their throats. For a moment, it looked like Akure had flipped the script. But Benin didn't break. General Erebo responded instantly, rallying his men, reorganizing the chaos, and launching a brutal counterstrike. It was pure carnage. Forest paths lit with flames. Screams echoing into the hills. Both sides were running on fumes, fueled by adrenaline and rage. Akure's plan was bold. Brave. But it wasn't enough. By morning, they were pushed back. Their forces thinned. Their spirits shaken. And the walls of Akure, cracked and burning. Still, they didn't surrender. The Deji made one last address, standing before his people, defiant even as the city crumbled. "We may fall," he said, "but we will not kneel." And then, Benin breached the city. They stormed in with terrifying precision, overpowering the defenders, tearing down resistance block by block. Fires roared, temples collapsed, and the once proud city of Akure was brought to its knees. It was over. Or, so it seemed. Victory is never free. Benin may have won, but the cost was heavy. Thousands dead. Towns destroyed. Even General Erebo, the unstoppable force, mortally wounded in the final push. The soldiers carried his body back like a fallen god. No cheers. No celebration. Just silence. Back in Benin, Oba Ozemwen received word of the victory. But it wasn't joy he felt, it was weight. The war had proven Benin's dominance, sure. But it had also exposed just how fragile that power was. The empire had bled for this win. And even empires can bleed out. As for Akure, their spirit wasn't crushed. Even in defeat, they rose from the ashes. Slowly. Quietly. The survivors rebuilt. New leaders emerged. And while the Deji had fallen, his legend only grew. Songs were sung, stories passed down. And in every tale, Akure was never just a city. It was a symbol of resistance, of courage, of never backing down. And deep down, even Benin knew they hadn't broken them. Not really. Years passed. The trees grew back. The land healed. But the echoes of that war, they never really left. In markets, people still whispered about the battle. Kids acted out scenes with sticks and sand. Elders told tales under moonlight about a time when fire met fury, and gods watched in silence. Benin's power would continue, but it would never be the same. The war with Akure had taken a chunk of its soul. It made other kingdoms wary, some defiant. It was like the illusion of invincibility had cracked. Akure, meanwhile, wore its scars with pride. They rebuilt stronger, wiser. And while they didn't try to provoke another war, they also didn't kneel. Not again. That war didn't just shape two cities. It reshaped the balance of the region. New alliances formed. New tensions brewed. It was like a giant had shaken the land, and the dust hadn't quite settled. But most of all, it taught a lesson. That even the mightiest empires can be tested. And sometimes, it's the ones who refuse to kneel that live forever in the stories. Today, when people talk about Benin and Akure, they talk about more than just war. They talk about identity, pride, resistance, and resilience. The War of 1818 wasn't just a clash of swords, it was a battle of wills, of history, of belief systems colliding in fire and fury. Benin remains one of the greatest empires Africa ever produced, rich in art, culture, and unmatched military history. But that moment in 1818, it reminded the world that power is never absolute. Akure, though smaller, etched its name in history through courage. They showed what it means to stand your ground even when the odds are brutal. And that bravery, that spirit, it still runs through their streets today. So next time someone asks about forgotten African history, don't talk about kings and borders alone. Tell them about Benin and Akure. Tell them about 1818. Because that war, that story, it's not just history, it's legacy.